So, for my photo project, I will be talking about prohibition in the United States. So, what exactly was prohibition? So, the 18th Amendment states that the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the importation thereof into or the exportation thereof from the United States and all territories subject to the jurisdiction was prohibited. The 18th Amendment was ratified on January 16, 1919, and it went into effect the following year on January 17, 1920. The 18th Amendment actually lasted for almost 14 years until the 21st Amendment was ratified, and it repealed the 18th Amendment on December 5th, 1933. So what was prohibition like in America? So the initial idea of enacting prohibition was that other companies would actually flourish since alcohol sales were prohibited. Some companies such as theaters, soft drink, grape juice, and chewing gum companies were expected to increase their sales to people since they were unable to purchase alcohol. It was also expected that household goods and clothing would actually skyrocket as well. It also was expected that the rent for homes were expected to rise since saloons had closed, making the neighborhood increase their value. The neighborhood value increase, since it was actually seen that if you had a saloon and a bar in the area, your house, it was seen as a low income area. So removing that bar or saloon, it would raise itself to a higher income, like a higher price neighborhood. But this was only the expected effects of prohibition. The actual effects of prohibition was the complete opposite of what everyone expected. Restaurants actually went out of business since they could not make a profit. Since they could not make a profit because they weren't able to sell alcohol. If you were to look at a receipt from a restaurant and there's an alcoholic beverage, they're very expensive. That's because they're able to make a profit from selling off alcoholic beverages, making that this profit actually was able to keep them afloat. And since they weren't able to sell this, they ended up running out of money, so they couldn't afford to keep the business open. Not only workers from restaurants were out of jobs, but distilleries, saloons, breweries, truckers, barrel makers, and other related jobs, those people actually were out of a job too because they actually relied on the production of alcohol. State budgets actually decreased since there was no liquor tax coming in. In New York, the New York State's budget during this time actually heavily relied on liquor tax. 75% of the state budget, like the money for the state budget, came from liquor tax, which means that it lost a lot of money to keep the state going. So my photo actually is about the Jewish religion and how they were affected during Prohibition as well. So wine is actually very normal in an everyday life for a Jewish person, especially at home. Wine is used for religious ceremonies, marriages, Passover, and other important parts of the Jewish community. So to be able to get actually get alcohol for these purposes, rabbis would actually send lists of their congregation members to the government so that they could be approved to get a permit. These permits would actually be given to the members, and once the members actually had the permits, they could go to a kosher wine distribution center and purchase a year's supply of wine, which was 10 gallons. Since the U.S. during this time was mainly Christian and Protestant, They couldn't actually distinguish the hierarchy of the Jewish religion, which opened a path for fraud. People could actually pose as rabbis to gain wine for themselves. So in my picture to the right, it is a kosher wine distribution center in the years 1920, between the years 1920 and 1933 in New York. So the person in this picture, he could be a congregation member getting his year's supply of wine. He could be a rabbi also getting his wine. Or this man could actually be a person posing as a rabbi just to get alcohol. Prohibition also led to the rise of organized crimes, especially the mob. So one of the most famous mobsters during this time was Al Capone, this man right here. He actually rose to power by selling illegal alcohol. He led the Chicago outfit and made $60 million per year supplying this illegal alcohol to thousands of speakeasies in the late 1920s. Another mobster during this time was Lucky Luciano. This man right here. He brought in millions bootlegging and actually inherited the crime family known as the Genovese family, the Genovese family actually was was part of the 5 biggest Italian mob groups during this time and actually later down the road. And this man right here, Machine Gun Kelly, he was a bootlegger as well, but he was more of a bank robber, but he still bootlegged for the money. So I've mentioned bootlegging actually quite a bit with the mobsters. So what exactly is bootlegging? So the definition of bootlegging is the illegal manufacture, sale of goods, or distribution of recordings or alcohol. So during this time, it was the distribution of alcohol. So much of the illegal liquor that actually came into the country was across the ocean in other countries. So ships carrying the illegal liquor would stop right outside the line of jurisdiction that the Coast Guard had, and they would load their shipments onto boats that would head into these waters and then drop them off on shore. These were high-powered boats, because they were able to outrun the boats of the Coast Guard, which were a lot slower. Another form of transporting alcohol was on people. In these pictures, these are actually ways that you could transport them locally. So in the top, this picture right here, bootlegging. So you would actually just put the bottle of liquor inside your boot and just walk around. Other ways were, between these two photos, was special holders that could be covered by coats to transport bottles of alcohol. These would probably be more for transporting liquor locally, since they could make a lot of noise with the glasses clinking together. So actually, one of the more common ways of getting alcohol was through a local speakeasy. These illegal barrooms had secret passwords, membership cards, and other ways to prove that you weren't a policeman. Speakeasies could be lavish with jazz rooms and dance floors, or just dirty old back rooms. Think of the movie Great Gatsby. Gatsby's house is actually a great example of how lavish these rooms could be when money was put into them. Speakeasies also had live entertainment like bands or singers, but during this time it was mainly jazz bands to bring in patrons from other speakeasies. The live entertainment was very appealing to patrons because they would choose to go to a speakeasy with live music than one that didn't have live music. Speakeasies were actually ill-kept secrets, so to keep police from busting them, the owners would actually pay off police with drinks or money to have them look the other way and not to bust them. So speakeasies sold a lot of alcohol and would actually dilute the alcohol with large quantities of water so they would be able to sell more of this alcohol. To hide the taste of diluted liquor, speakeasies started to combine diluted liquor with non-alcoholic beverages and flavoring, and they promoted these drinks. This led to the name cocktails, which means that cocktails are only about 100 years old. So if you really like cocktails, you have to think Prohibition, because if there wasn't Prohibition, there would probably not be the huge thing of cocktails. So how were speakeasies able to get away for so long by selling alcohol? Like I said in a previous slide, owners would actually pay off low-paid police with money or liquor, since they're human too. They wanted liquor, but they had to enforce no one could sell liquor. They would create fake walls to hide the bars behind. Also, some speakeasies had drop shelves in the bars. So all you would do is press a button on the wall, and all of the shelves behind the bar would drop, making the bottles of liquor on those shelves drop down a chute and into the basement, where they would end up crashing onto the floor and breaking. This was actually used because bottles of liquor could be used as evidence in trials against the owner. So if there was no bottles with alcohol in them, it couldn't be used as evidence against the owners. So after almost 14 years of Prohibition, how did it actually end? So the Great Depression actually helped end Prohibition. With a decline of jobs during this time, the appeal of legalizing the production of liquor was looked at in a favorable viewpoint. This actually helped President Roosevelt win the presidency in 1932 because he ran on the idea of bringing back the production of liquor so that more people would be able to get jobs. Congress passed the 21st Amendment in 1933 to repeal the 18th Amendment, which ended Prohibition. And on that day, it is said that President Roosevelt celebrated the end of Prohibition with a dirty martini, his favorite drink. So that is my photo project on Prohibition in the United States.